We are talking the dystopian science fiction movie Captive State. This has got a pretty good cast. You've got John Goodman, you've got Via Farmiga, and a few other kind of character actors who you know from sort of genre films and kind of stuff like that. So the budget's actually about $25 million here. So it's a kind of a medium budget film, certainly not a low budget film. And the premise here is that we have this alien invasion that has already happened on the Earth in the near future somewhere. It doesn't actually say specifically when, but you know, within the next kind of 10 years or so. And this alien species have essentially conquered the Earth, but they're kind of like an absent parent. So they are ruling the Earth, but they are not really seen at this point in time. This is about 9 years after the initial invasion, and all of the humanity is essentially given up and surrendered to these aliens who kind of now rule, but they let these human collaborators essentially kind of run it for them, and just kind of like an absent parent, so to speak. So basically we have this kind of these kind of humans that have drunk the Kool-Aid, and they're kind of, oh, you know, the world's so much better now, etc., etc., since we've had our new friend, blah blah blah. And you of course have this underground network of people who are kind of resistance fighters. So the kind of parallels can be drawn here to kind of Nazi-occupied France, where you had the kind of like the French resistance and the kind of the obviously the Nazis as the kind of the occupying force here. So it's very much like a kind of a that type of thing. It's kind of like this kind of you know, revolutionary fighters. I mean, on one hand you call them that, on the other hand you might call them terrorists, but it's about this kind of the resistance ultimately trying to strike a blow for humanity and prove to people that if they fight back, if they, you know, there's a chance for humanity to ultimately kind of you know, take the Earth back from these aliens and their collaborators. Now, the story focuses mainly on two characters. John Goodman's character, who plays like a kind of like a CIA type guy. He's not like a CIA doesn't exist anymore, but that kind of role. He's like a government agent sort of thing, and his kind of motives are a bit murky. You know, he seems to be kind of one of the collaborators. And then we have this young lad called Gabriel, whose brother was quite a kind of a well-known resistance kind of personnel. And there's a whole kind of like conspiracies. It's a lot of kind of espionage film, really. Kind of lots of kind of like sneaking around. So this movie feels like it's kind of one of these kind of like French resistance movies, but just with the kind of like sci-fi elements. It's lots of kind of like people trying to kind of do civil unrest with this kind of this oppressive government. So think of it like that, with just kind of like the kind of the sci-fi elements kind of peppered in. So let's talk about Captive State. So it's a fairly ambitious movie for obviously a relatively kind of low budget, but it's got high enough budget here where the kind of the production value looks pretty good. Like I said, you've got a pretty good cast of lots of kind of recognisable names, or faces at least, and I think they do a good job of the acting here. So the acting is all pretty good. They've hired all good actors across the board here. I don't think there's any duds here whatsoever. Everyone is very convincing in their roles. The special effects, when we see them, which is a kind of, there's not loads of them. We don't see the aliens loads, but when we do see them, I think they're to a good effect. They look pretty original as well. They are kind of, we see them in different kind of forms, and there's various different types of kind of soldier type aliens, I suppose you want to call them, and they look pretty menacing, and they've developed a whole language and everything like that. So the actual world building here, I think, is all pretty good. And the movie is kind of has a real maturity with it. It's kind of very much a film where you have to kind of pay attention. There's lots of kind of like double crosses, and sort of like the plot is going. We don't really know, you know, who's involved with who, etc. So it's almost like this kind of like this game of double cross, really. When we do have these kind of more, I suppose, more action orientated scenes, I struggle to say action sequences, but certainly there's scenes here that have a lot of kind of tension, a lot of kind of stakes, and you really do feel, because of the way this is filmed and the kind of the acting and everything and the direction, that there's real kind of like a sense of tension within this movie. And you know, when we get the aliens kind of get wind of what's going on, and they're trying to find these kind of resistance fighters, you're kind of at the edge of your seat because it's very kind of exciting. Do I have any problems with this film? The movie has a weird narrative, I would say. I mean, I would say this is a film where it's not going to be for everyone, because you have to kind of pay attention, and the movie does treat its audience with some intelligence. But I feel it maybe doesn't do quite enough good of making the narrative, you know, all that obvious, so to speak, until really kind of quite towards the end. So I feel it's easy to get lost with this film, certainly for some people perhaps. And the film also has no real central protagonist. Initially we're following our character Gabriel, but about a third of the movie in, it actually focuses on a group of resistance fighters, of which most of them we haven't seen before, for the second act of the movie. And then it kind of goes back to more of a John Goodman's kind of story, with kind of a bit more of Gabriel in it. So there's no real protagonist exactly. And then I don't think it does a particularly good job of really introducing you and getting to know these characters. So you're not particularly invested in some of the kind of the character work here, which I think is if I have to have a flaw with this film, is the biggest one here. Is the characterization is a little weak on some of the characters, and it may have been better as a series, I think, potentially, or at least maybe one or two parts, or something like that. It just seems we're just lacking a little bit of kind of character work here. The editing is also a little choppy. I've seen this kind of picked up on a couple of other reviews, and I have to concur that I do feel some of the editing here is on the poorer side. But overall, I got to say, I thought this movie was quite good. I quite enjoyed it, and it's certainly a very tense movie. It's not a particularly like massive, special effects extravaganza. It's certainly more of a subdued film, but when we do have these elements of kind of fantastic, visuals and all that, it does it to a good standard. I'll give this one a 7 out of 10. I actually thought this was quite fun. So, have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.